small audience at present. So if I say something you don't understand, please interrupt me and we'll try and clarify. If we can go to the next slide, please. The reason I want to talk about advanced care directives is that I think there are two main events in our lives. We're born and we end up dying at some point in time. The circumstances of our birth we have no control over. Perhaps our parents have some input, but otherwise we can't control the when, the where, and the how. However, I do think we have some options as we approach our death, assuming it's not sudden and unexpected, where we do have some control over the when, where, and the how. When, probably not, but where, for example, we can perhaps decide whether or not we want to die in a hospital setting or otherwise, and the how. What's the mechanism of our death going to be? For many people, especially during the COVID epidemics, their deaths occur when they're in an intensive care unit, on life support, with dozens of medications flowing into their system. I myself would not want that to occur. Now, a tiny bit of background about myself. I've been in the practice of medicine for a long, long time. I recently retired at the end of last year. At the very beginning of my career, I was an ICU doctor. So I was involved in the heroics of care. But at the opposite end of my career, I became a hospice and a palliative care doctor, where the emphasis was not upon necessarily saving life, but maintaining as much quality of life as possible. And part of the reason I've been asked to do this presentation is because I am now a board member of VPAS. If I can have the next slide, please. Now, by definition, an advanced care directive is something that is given in writing. I think many of us will give oral instructions or at least a philosophy to our families or loved ones about how we want our care to occur. But I think it's very important, if at all possible, to put our wishes on paper so we have something that is permanent, that can be transferred from one setting to another, and that is also available if there is contention amongst the loved ones, especially children, about what the course is that we wish to see done for ourselves or not done for ourselves. Now, we'll draw a bit of a distinction between a living will, which many of us have, or at the very least were asked about if we were admitted to a hospital. A living will is a fairly simple document that for many of us defines, do we wish to undergo a resuscitation? And there it oftentimes ends. Whereas an advanced care directive goes much beyond this, where you can, for example, say that I do not want to go to the hospital. Or if I went to the hospital, I would not want to be placed in the ICU. Or if I went to the hospital and I was in the ICU, I would decline to be put on a breathing machine. So you can expand your options considerably. And part of an advanced care directive, I think, if it's not already done, is to have someone you designate as your power of attorney for medical affairs. And simplistically, I think the best person is the one who you think would speak the best for you, who knows you, who knows your philosophy of how you want your life run and how you want your life to end. And that can be anyone within your family unit. And in fact, it doesn't even have to be a family member. It could be a trusted friend or confidant. Next one, please. Now, part of the reason I think we need to all think about an advanced care directive is, even though many of us have expressed at one time or another how we want things to go at the end of our life, still so many people, because they have not committed their thoughts to paper or have not made it clear to their families, end up dying in an environment that they really don't wish to be in. For example, at least 70% of people on average say they would like to die in the comfort of their home. However, one half of people still in this country end up dying in a nursing home or a hospital, a relatively sterile environment that is far from what we consider to be our center of comfort. If we have patients who are having poorly controlled pain, okay, many of those will end up dying without that pain being relieved unless they have expressed a philosophy of care. And as a former hospice doctor, I think this is where hospice and palliative care becomes very important, because a main focus of hospice and palliative care is improving upon pain control. One thing I think that a lot of folks don't anticipate or understand, pardon, is that up to a quarter of Medicare patients are in and out of an ICU in their last month of life. As a provider, many times you can see the writing on the wall for these individuals, that you know they're going to go down the tubes, but yet you are forced to continue on with an aggressive course of care because there is not an advanced care directive or some consensus amongst the family in terms of how they want things handled. 90% of people say that they want to talk to their families about end-of-life care, but startlingly so, only 30% have actually done it. I think that's part of just the denial mechanism, that we know we're going to die, but we don't know when it's going to occur, and therefore let's defer the discussion. But again, as a provider, so many times I saw people who suddenly collapsed with a heart attack or a stroke, or they were in shock or whatever, and the event had occurred that may threaten their life, but they have not expressed their wishes to their families about what they want done or not want done. And therefore, again, oftentimes you are forced to follow an aggressive course of care. I think part of the reason why so few people talk to their loved ones and families is because when you want to spare them having to think about these agonizing decisions. But again, having been on the receiving end of this as a provider, I think it's terribly important to do such. Next slide, please. Now, how do you go about this? I think first and foremost, you've got to get the idea inside your head that you will have the conversation with your family. Now, when I say family, there may be people who are so against any reduction in the level of care, you may not want to necessarily have them included in the initial discussions. But ultimately, I think all of your immediate family should be involved at one point in time or the other. I think it's important to write out, at least in a rough draft, what your wishes are. For a specific example is given here. Let's say you've had a stroke. Let's say that your chances of ever returning to independent living are very, very limited. Some people in that circumstance will say, treat me as best you can, but don't support my life beyond a point where it is quantity without quality. For example, you may decline to have a feeding tube placed in that circumstance in which artificial nutrition is provided. Oftentimes, when I had these kinds of discussions with patients and their families, it was not at all uncommon for the family, the loved ones in particular, to disagree that there would be any limitations placed upon your care. But the emphasis here is that lay the seed, plan it, discuss it, and discuss it again, because it's rare that you're going to have a unanimity of opinion the first time you begin this discussion. The idea is get it started, think about it. Even though I'm in very good health, I anticipate I have many years left in my existence. I have had these discussions with my family and made my wishes known beginning 30 to 40 years ago. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Joyce. Now, I put many of these things in quotes because these are phrases that are sometimes used to open the discussion. Again, and the very first one, I think, emphasizes that your current state of health is adequate, but you know that something might happen quite unexpectedly. That stroke, that severe brain injury, the disabling heart attack, any number of things, and you want to express your philosophy of what you want done or not done ahead of time. Or you could be like me. I'm now 70 years of age. I'm nearing the end of my lifespan. And even though I'm currently in good health, I do not want to die a miserable death. I fear disability far worse than I fear death. You know, you can take a sort of a non-committal approach and said, I took an online survey. I saw this somewhere about expressing your wishes. And because of that, I now want to go over this with you as my family. Or the very last would be that most hospitals now have to ask on admission, do you have a living will directive? And most also ask now, do you have an advanced care directive? And again, I think the best time to state your wishes is before the crisis has occurred, or before the crisis has occurred and you can no longer speak for yourself. Next one, please. And I think as there is a start to a conversation, there should be a finish to the conversation. So once you have put your thoughts down, once you have made these known to your loved ones and to your family, I think it's good to go over specifically what you have said or not said. Again, I use the example of not going to the intensive care unit or not going to the hospital or not having a feeding tube placed. And again, I would reiterate to my family each specific bullet point. This is what I want done. This is what I don't want done. I think you have to emphasize that these are your directives, you know, especially your kids. They want you to live forever, but you know, as an individual, that's not going to be the case. So you must re-emphasize to them that these are your wishes for their care and they have to follow your wishes, not necessarily the child's intention to have my parents live forever. And I think we should keep these conversations open-ended. You know, perhaps you have put down your wishes, perhaps you have made it very clearly known, all right, but circumstances may change. And I think we should be willing to keep the discussion open with our loved ones and our families. And I think we should finalize this at some point and say, now's the time to put pen to paper. Now's the time to commit this. Now's the time to communicate this to our physicians, and if need be, to our attorney, or if need be, to our financial advisors. This is what I want done. This is what I don't want done. Next one, please. Now, I have used myself as an example, and I've already said that in my age, I've lived a long life. I've lived a very good life, and I fear disability much more so than I fear death itself. If I'm no longer able to enjoy my current quality of life, if something has happened to me that is irreversible, that will rob me of my independence, either physically or mentally or both, then death is no longer the enemy to me. And in what time I have remaining, I want to emphasize the quality of my life. I do not necessarily want to do things that extend quantity and quantity alone. My father died when he was 92. And in the last 6 months of his existence, he said something to me that I have carried since that time. He said, I'm not living, I'm existing. I will not die in a nursing home. I told my kids I'll haunt them till the ends of their lives if they stick me in a nursing home. I want to die at home. I would prefer not to die in a hospital, but if something happens, okay, and I end up in a hospital and they can't send me back home, that I want a palliative approach to my care during that terminal hospital admission. And as a hospice and palliative care physician, I very much encourage everyone to be willing to think about having hospice or palliative care involved in the process sooner rather than later. Hospice says there's a life expectancy of 6 months or less. Palliative care, which talks about quality versus quantity, has no time limit to it. You could be involved in palliative care for 30 or 40 years at a stretch. As an example, you could have a kid who's born with a form of muscular dystrophy. You know, his or her lifespan is going to be limited. They can be involved in palliative care basically from the very beginning until the time that they eventually succumb. Next slide, please. So here is where we talk about a variety of resources. There are a number of things that are out there. The VA has an excellent program. VPAS has an independent program. Virtually any hospice or palliative care organization has programs that will talk about advanced care directives, living wills, powers of attorney, all those types of things. If you wish, virtually any attorney should be able to help you with these types of things, though I will emphasize an attorney is not a necessity. I drew up my living will and my advanced care directives, and I gave those to my estate attorney, but he did not have to do anything further, right? The key is to ask for help. If you're not comfortable with this process, ask for help. It's out there. Last but not least, I would file any of this information electronically. You know, if you wind up in a hospital in a somewhat foreign environment for you, you're out of state, you're out of country, whatever, then you could have this access electronically from anywhere in the world, especially if you're in a situation where you're no longer capable of speaking for yourself.